just end up somewhere else. Our guest today is Chris Burdick. He's going to talk about, some really intriguing stuff I'm excited about. I was looking at this authors of Clamor, how noise took over the world and how we can take it back. Chris, thanks for stopping by. How are you?
I'm great, Neil. How you doing?
Fantastic. Chris, when thinking about specifically what made you want to kind of become a writer, how did that happen?
Oh man, it was. I think for many of us, a good teacher goes a long way. And I had a great teacher in high school, an English teacher, who made us write all the time. Kind of every student's nightmare. We had to write essays every week, and I just found it to be something that uh, everybody who's an adolescent is looking for that way to define themselves, and this just seemed I was a fish in water, and that made me want to become a writer. What kind of writer took some evolving over time.
Yeah, and when you think about, becoming a writer, the process, it's not easy. It's not an easy thing, especially it become to say this is going to be something you're going to do a lot of, right? Because there's a lot of rejection in writing.
Yes, and that in fact, when I was just out of college, I was an intern at the Atlantic Monthly magazine, and one of the jobs of the interns is to go through what they call the slush pile, which is essentially uh, files and files, thousands of unsolicited manuscripts that would, fiction writers send in, short stories, in the hopes that one of them might catch the eye of an editor there for publication. And what they really hope for is that an intern like myself would pass it on to the fiction editor for a handwritten rejection slip. And so I thought at that point I might want to become a novelist or a fiction writer. And I thought, I don't need too much. I don't need to be rich. I don't need fame, but I kind of need more than just holding out hope for a handwritten rejection slip. So that kind of steered me to journalism, to write about other things going on, other people in the world, to tell their stories.
Right. And writing and telling their stories. So how long were you kind of give us your background in writing before writing this book?
Yeah, so I have been a journalist since 1997. When I was an intern, I refused to leave the Atlantic. They eventually hired me to be a staff editor there for a couple of years. And then I went out west and I worked as the research editor, which is sort of like the head of the fact-checking department at an investigative magazine called Mother Jones. I worked there for a little over a year and went back to school for journalism for a master's degree. And then when I was done with that, I tried my hand at freelancing, trying to get hired at various places. Eventually landed as covering science for Boston University for like their daily news website, um, and did that for about 5 years. I wrote and did multimedia for them as well, and then went back to the freelancing game and wrote my first book called Mind Over Mind, which is sort of about the placebo effect in both medical and non-medical contexts. That was about 12 years ago. And after that, I thought I was going to just start writing books, just start churning out books. uh, it wasn't the case. To really get into a book project is a labor of love. You have to really just be so taken by a topic that you don't mind the lack of income, the time it's going to take, the people that are going to keep asking you, how's the book coming, year after year. Eventually I did find the new topic, which was noise. I wrote an article for the Boston Globe Sunday magazine about a public health researcher who was looking at noise, and I had never really thought about noise in particular except when it bothered me,
Right.
which I think is most people's kind of interface with the topic. But I started to read all the epidemiology about all the ways that noise not only affects our hearing, but through stress and through disrupted sleep can really have impacts on, heart health, and can lead to an increased risk of stroke, can actually, have mental health issues related to it, hypertension, you name it. And I thought, well, this is interesting. There's this pollutant out there that is causing all these problems, but nobody can really agree on what it is. So
Wow.
that
Okay.
kind of that kind of sparked the whole interest that led to the book. Eventually, I had a couple other magazine pieces related to noise, and I said, yes, this is a topic worth a book.
So when you did the research after you figured it out, what a perfect storm. I wouldn't. What kind of noise is really dangerous for is a public nuisance? What types of stuff are you seeing, and that how it causes all these health issues?
Right. So, I mean, we'll start, the book kind of takes noise from the inside out. And so I started looking at how noise impacts our inner ear. And, it's it's an amazing piece of anatomy that can converts all of the vibrations of air molecules that are sound into what we hear. But it's also vulnerable when you get to a certain decibel level. And that also depends on, how long you're exposed to it. So if it's, 100 decibels, it's a much shorter exposure time that will damage that inner ear machinery and start to degrade our ability to hear. And what starts to happen, first of all, is that the fine-grained connections, not just the ability to sense sound, but to actually differentiate sound in, say, a noisy environment, to kind of tell one person's voice from another when you're trying to have a conversation in a noisy restaurant. That sort of fine-grained um, connection, that starts to degrade pretty quickly. And then after that, you start to lose the tone, to the ability to sense tones at certain frequencies unless it's cranked up. That's the kind of stuff that you test for in with audiograms. When you hear the beeps,
Right.
basically what happens is your inside your ear, in your cochlea, are these little cells called hair cells, and they communicate to the auditory nerve using a neurotransmitter called glutamate. But if they have too much acoustic energy hitting them, they pump out too much glutamate, and essentially they they pop. And so that's kind of the first part of noises, influence on. That's where decibels really matter, in the inner ear. But if you go beyond the inner ear, you start to deal with how noise affects the mind. And one thing that you look at there is that distraction is a huge noise problem.
Yep.
We can only handle so many signals coming at us at once. So when you are at work and you're trying to do a deadline and you have all kinds of coworkers around you, chatting on their video calls, or the machinery of the offices are going, and the HVAC and noise from outside, you start to your focus is shattered and you start to feel stress. And the studies have shown that as the office noise ramps up, people have to take more breaks. They lose productivity and
Right.
they have more sick days. Because stress is kind of like, it comes from many sources, it comes from many noise sources as well. But what happens is, the sort of inflammatory response that happens with the fight or flight reaction of stress, where you've got all these,
Exactly.
like, yeah, it's just, but it gets chronic, and it starts to kind of clog your arteries, basically. And that can happen at all kinds of decibel levels, when you're at work, I said, and when you're trying to sleep, and the
There's
traffic
noise
noise.
outside or certain things.
Yeah, yeah. So that can
What
also have
about
a
what
big
about
effect.
ear ringing? What does that mean?
So that is tinnitus. And
Yeah.
what I had read about it, and I'm obviously not a doctor, but the prevailing idea is that when those hair cells in your inner ear, which are tuned to certain frequencies, all of them, when one of them goes bust, your brain, in order to try to like recreate that tone, just generates it. It's like
Mm-hmm.
a sort of hallucination, essentially,
Mm-hmm. Right.
of an internal tone to match what is now missing from the auditory, from the sensory incoming inputs. So that's why a lot of ringing in the ears is at the higher decibel, or excuse me, higher frequency levels. That's where the hair cells are the most vulnerable, and that's where the hearing loss starts. Generally, when you have those audiograms, they look at the what they call a threshold shift, and
Right.
it's usually at the higher frequency levels.
And it's interesting, they don't perform lots of hearing tests unless you ask them to, right?
Yeah.
That's the other big thing is it's not as concentrated to look at this versus other things.
Yes, that's true. And the other thing that's an issue, I don't know that it's, yeah, well, I'll put it this way. the way that they test for hearing, as I said, is that they test for the beeps. And it's kind of like, can you hear this beep at this frequency level at a low decibel level? But imagine if they tested vision the same way. You look at the eye chart and the eye doctor would just say, is there anything at all on that next line down? You wouldn't have to read out the letters of the numbers or
Right.
make any sense out of it. It's just like, is there something there? And so a lot of what we start to have the hearing loss affect us is not caught by that initial screening. So that's another problem.
I mean, it's impressive to what you've researched. You should become a doctor the way you've gotten all this information and have such knowledge in this. I mean, but what jobs do you think are the most dangerous for hearing loss?
Well, according to OSHA, and they have to, they're the ones that are supposed to be kind of keeping track of the
Right.
noisiest, they are the ones that are out there saying this job here has to provide hearing protection for employees. And you also have to, you can't make them wear it, but you have to provide it and you have to have hearing screenings every year. They basically look at mining, heavy industry, uh, there's a third one, but mining and heavy industry are kind of the big ones that they are focused on. But they recently did kind of a nationwide survey of all sorts of different occupations just to look for sort of rates of hearing loss. And they found it everywhere. They found it with police officers. They found it with people who work in the service industry, like in restaurants, for instance. It's not exclusive to those areas, to those industries that you think of as having, a whole lot of heavy machinery making really high decibel noise all the time. But that's probably where, I think they probably have it right in terms of that's where the most noise is hitting the most ears.
Loud crowds, noise, being out in loud crowd noise is bad.
Yeah, it is, and I don't know that necessarily it will be enough to be damaging to your hearing, that kind of noise. It might be, it's like the usual guideline, and people argue about this all the time, is this essentially around 80 decibels or 85 decibels starts to become potential danger to hearing. And if you're in a crowd at like a rock
Sporting.
concert, sporting event, yeah, it can get there, but usually it's not sustained at that level and it's not going to be
Mm.
for hours at a time. But you'll see now a lot more children are taken to these events that have some hearing protection on, and that's, I think, a shift in sort of social norms about you know whether people look at you funny if you're trying to protect your hearing
With
at a
earplugs, yes.
yeah, yeah. I talked to a woman named Kathy Peck, who she was a former punk rock musician, um, performed in the 80s, and she started to lose her hearing when she was in her 20s. She ended up needing hearing aids, and so she devoted the final, not the final, the second half of her career to promoting hearing protection among musicians. She started to get all these famous folks coming out of the woodwork, Eric Clapton and Chris Martin and Eddie Vedder. They all were saying, yes, I'm also losing my hearing or I'm having tinnitus, and um, now major musicians, they'll all protect their hearings on stage, and the conservatories and colleges of music, they'll have classes in
Oh, wow.
the vulnerability of the ears. Yeah, so it's changing, I think.
And I think, what about even a profession like my own when I was wearing headphones? I don't, as a podcaster, as much as I did when I was a radio show host, where I would be down in my basement doing just radio because there was no there was live streaming of podcasting and radio, but no one was really doing the Zoom thing at that point in time. COVID's when I started really doing more, unless I was going to the television studio. I have a feeling that has a lot to do with potential little bit of tinnitus I have.
It
Is
yeah,
that is that
I think so. I mean, the World Health Organization has been looking at this because so many people now are wearing the earbuds, and they the the music is coming at them or whatever they're streaming
Way too high.
way too high. So they are saying because of this, maybe 1 billion young people are at risk of noise-induced hearing loss from um, listening too loud, essentially. Right now, there's a hearing study being done by Apple uh, in conjunction with their Apple Watch. So now people are tracking all sorts of health parameters, and hearing and noise exposure is one of them.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of looking at what volume levels people are listening to their devices at, and what the other environmental exposures are from sound.
So that's I guess the next big thing is looking at specifically what causes it. But I could see my days as a professional wrestler, Chris, has something to do with it. I screamed and yelled when I was a bad guy, and to the decibel level that you wouldn't even imagine. I have no idea how I didn't lose my voice. A lot of the other guys have lost horsey voices and stuff. I did it for about 9 years.
Yeah.
Loud crowds there. Then with the big headphones on, with the Rode microphone, that had a lot to do with it. And I started discovering some tendonitis. What have you learned in the research when you discover tendonitis? There's not really any cure for it.
No. And that's the thing. It's
Tinnitus. I almost said,
tinnitus. Yeah,
yeah.
tendonitis also, but tinnitus is one of those things that you can't, the first thing they say is don't try to uh, block it out the way you would an external sound because it's internal. And so one thing that helps is to have something, if you're wearing a hearing aid, or if you have one of those like Apple AirPod type devices and you're streaming, you add kind of a like a masking sound to it, because then if you feed in that external input to your brain, the brain will be like, oh, okay, cool, everything's okay. I don't need to uh,
Yeah, and
crank
I
up.
notice it only certain times. When I focus on it, I notice it.
Yeah, it's a tension folk, it's
And
tension
I have
driven.
no idea. One day I spotted it.
Right. So if you can get yourself to that place where you can ignore it, that's where you want to be.
I can ignore it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So
and then like right now, because you're talking about it, it's leading it to make it worse. Thank you. Appreciate that.
that 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 is a side effect of my book. I'm a little worried about it, but
It's a definite side effect of doing an interview with you. So thank you. Because I'm thinking about it. But then when I start concentrating, I keep going and I talk to Chatty Kathy, my AI chatbot, all day long.
Yeah.
When I have their little head, I still wear the old headphones. I don't even have the ones that are, and I'm talking to her and then vacuuming and doing, yeah. I ignore it. I don't spot it. But right now, so it has a lot to do with you can make it worse, can't you? Nerves can make it worse, right? Thinking about it, paying attention to it can make it go louder.
Yes. And there's a great study, not on tinnitus, but on just the power of attention when it comes to what we hear. And that's from this guy named Colin Cherry. He was a British engineer in the 50s. When he asked people, he put headphones on people and he had them listening to two different sentences being spoken, one in each ear. And he's like, well, what can you tell me about what was said? And they had a real hard time. They were like, somebody said something about a box, or somebody said something about a
Right.
cat, right? And he's like, well, just listen to the one in your left ear and ignore the one in your right ear. Just pay attention to the left ear. And after a few times, they could just recite whatever came in their left ear. And then he'd say, well, can you tell me anything about what you were hearing in the right ear? They're like, no, nothing, nothing. You could like change the language, go from English to French or whatever. They wouldn't notice it. So, what we hear and what we attend to, they are kind of the same thing. I think it's a huge, very powerful piece.
So I'll have to think about that. See, I've learned so much. We should call you Dr. Chris. But now, writing this book, is this making you more want to expand this knowledge after you see that there's not enough out there still on hearing, and looking at it in a further way of expansion, and looking at and studying this more?
Yeah, I think it has, although, it's one of those things where, the first draft of this book, Neil, was like 100,000 words. It was a crazy amount of stuff I just got interested in. It was the fun part is learning about this stuff for me anyway. And so I wrote this massive manuscript, and I spent the next year and a half just cutting things away. So part of me is like, well, I go back to these things that I had to, leave out of the book and bring them back to life somehow and do the reporting to kind of get them back up to date. Some of this research is a few years old now. So that's kind of where I'm looking for this.
Okay. Well, I have a feeling you will pick any subject and want to research it forever. And what is your take with AI as an author? Now, that's the other thing. Some authors are totally saying, I can't even be part of AI. I'm ignoring it, which is a huge mistake. I think it can make a research writer like you very successful, meaning to crank out more books, to learn more things. But when it comes to fiction writers, it's a different story.
Yeah. So I have two thoughts about it. I think AI is a really helpful research aid. If I want to, I use it for um, making just sort of natural language inquiries about any topic under the sun. And then I follow it up, because it does hallucinate sometimes and give me some bad information. But some of the tools, I don't know if you use Perplexity or not. That's kind of a
No, one of my clients is Owen Yeoman in The Mentalist. He has EdU, and he has
yeah,
all the different things for an AI tutoring company that I'm working with. But I use ChatGPT and I love 4.5. I'm spending about $200 a month for it, and it's unreal.
yeah,
Unreal the research, unreal what it can do while you're on the go.
right. Well,
Perplex. Yeah, go.
well, I was just gonna say Perplexity for me is one of the ways I use AI. I also use it in like simpler ways, like I use, AI to transcribe my interviews, that kind of stuff. But in
Yeah.
terms of like the composition work, I don't use it. For me, I find like writing is part of my thinking process.
Yeah, it's
Writing,
something you enjoy. You
I
can't, you
enjoy,
don't,
well, not only do I enjoy it, but I also feel like I don't really know exactly what I want to say until I put that first draft down. I need to kind of like make my mental machinery go for a while. And I'm sure there's some limited ways in which, if I had, Claude or one of those other AI models to kind of be a first pass editor, that might work.
No, it's definitely more the
But
idea. It's
yeah,
more of the streamlining, the ability to come up with more and more books to write.
yeah,
And productivity is one of the biggest things that people miss with AI. It's not to do it for you, it's to improve your productivity to make you much stronger and better at what you do.
yeah,
Whatever that does, whatever your weaknesses are, AI is able to fix those weaknesses while making yourself better.
yeah,
As writers and creators, it's the greatest time for creativity because of the evolution of AI.
yeah.
People just have to embrace it.
I've used it. I've used AI image generation for. I have a newsletter now that I started about 6 months
Yeah.
ago about these topics, and I've used it a few times to kind of create.
It's now 100,000 times better.
Yeah,
It's improved on ChatGPT. I can literally take an album cover or picture, that picture right there, reproduce it, make it change and all that. It's to that level. It's ending graphic designing. Graphic designers are going to be kind of like when drawers used to draw or paint, used to
hmm,
just paint. Now physically it's your brain allowing AI to do it. That's
yeah,
probably going to happen in writing too. Like I'm working with a client right now that's ghostwriting their story, and I'm interviewing them. I'll take all that information and ghostwriting and hundreds of interviews, plug it in, say, where's he repeating himself, create an outline, put all these things together and get the whole phase of the story and what's going to work well for screenwriting or not. It's all about the prompt, which makes it difficult because if you're not a great prompter, AI is going to be something that, but that's where I get excited every day is
yeah,
what am I going to learn new? What like we were grilling yesterday and I didn't know how to use a charcoal griller and I was allowing everyone else to do it and I'm saying I can't wait any longer. I asked AI, literally improves the temperature by 150 degrees in 2 seconds based on the ideas they came up with.
yeah,
Anything you can create anything you want, what you want with AI, but it's all about your idea and how you do it and develop it.
yeah,
Writing, I'm still in that process. I agree with you. But I believe in about 6 months, it will be one of the best editors. It will never be that creator, but it can help you become a better creator.
yeah. I think that's the trick, right? That's the key because I think part of the way a lot of people will want to use it is sort of just to say, look, this is something that I don't feel like doing. Here, AI, you do it. And where if you could find the ways to kind of get, structure the workflow so that you are actually still the one in charge of your own creativity with supercharging it with AI, that's where you want to be, I
I'll give
think.
you my marketing agency. Flat
Yeah.
out, now I'm better. I can handle other things in marketing and become the CMO because of the ability of AI.
Hmm.
However, I still have more knowledge in answering the question of what should I do by figuring out an idea of a client and going through it. However, it takes me through that journey, figures out something else, say, okay, yeah, let's flow further with this.
Yeah.
It gives you that Madison Avenue PR marketing that then you can tailor for a client that would not have those ideas and be able to plug it together and put it together and make something even different and always pushing it further.
Yeah.
That's where I see the creativity. So if I was going to write a book, I'd want to be the full creator driver. However, I would want to get the ideas, add better characters, put better things into the process, and make it even better and keep pushing it further.
Hmm.
Not, okay, it's my microwave automation button. No. How can I make it so that I become a super genius brain? Think of that. I'm going to put, and I can't believe we got in this conversation. I guess two Pittsburghers in a way. I'll go ahead and put, in my brain, I will do what when Elon has that Neuralink, I'm going to do it.
Hmm. Hmm. All right.
That because I want to become super brain so that I can do that and I can utilize all of what my skill sets are, be able to do it and become better.
Yeah.
That's what we need to do it is
Yeah.
use AI to become better, not use it to take over what we do.
Right. Yeah. I would agree with you, Neil,
All
for
right.
sure.
Best place we can purchase your book. Where can we go?
Well, the folks at Norton would say, go to the Norton page, and I don't have the URL off the top of my head, but if you go to my website, which is just www.chrisburdick.com, that's a one-stop shop.
I love it. And the one shop. What new book in the line? Do you have another book coming?
Not yet, not yet. Hopefully, not another 12 years though.
Well, thanks for bringing my ears even more. I'm gonna have to say text you later and say, okay, it went away. So I
Hey,
didn't know that. I thought it was always constant, the ear ringing. And when you think about it, it comes out.
it gets worse. I think some people who have it real severe, it's hard to ignore it. But if you're lucky enough, like I have a little bit of it too, and if
So
you're,
it's something about getting older, then right? I'm
it
52,
it
so
it does, but I think you can get it without being old just by the noise that will damage those hair cells.
it's fascinating. But now I don't have to worry as much because you
No,
kind of help me in a way if I can control it. So it is the whole thing that the brain can control everything in so many ways if you learn to
yeah,
control your brain.
yeah, yeah. You hear with your brain, not with your ears.
Did you know that before writing the book?
No, I learned it from, well, I learned that very quote from a guy named Charles Lieberman at Mass Eye and Ear, and he studies the how the hearing system, even at kind of the lower levels of sound, can start to lose that kind of fine-grained connections I was talking to you about. He studies that, and so he mentioned that to me, and his research shows it.
Fascinating conversation. Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks again.
Hey Neil, appreciate